I was waist deep in freezing water, arms locked around a drenched bear cub that wasn't moving. Its fur was slicked to its body, eyes half closed, belly barely rising. It had gone limp just seconds before I got to it. The river was faster than it looked from the bank. I didn't think. I just jumped in when I saw its small body bobbing and twisting in the current. No time to weigh options. No one else around. Just me and the sound of rushing water. I pressed the cub's chest, tilted its head, even tried to clear its mouth. I didn't know what I was doing. Only what I'd seen in videos, maybe in some first aid class years ago. I muttered, come on, don't do this. And then, like a switch flipping, it coughed. A weak, wet sound. The smallest movement. It was alive. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours and looked around, still holding it against my chest. Trees lined the bank. The clearing I hiked through earlier was a blur now. I was so focused on the cub I hadn't noticed how silent the woods had become. Then I heard it. A low, solid thump behind me. Then another. Like someone dropping a heavy log onto the ground. But steadier. Rhythmic. My breath caught. I turned my head slowly, still kneeling in the shallow water with the cub cradled in my arms. A shadow moved between the trees. Then two more. I stood up, slowly, not daring to make a sound. The cub whimpered. I froze. From the tree line, about 20 feet away, emerged the first adult bear. Its shoulders were massive, fur glinting golden brown in the morning light. It paused, nose high, nostrils flaring. Behind it, another. Then another. They didn't charge. They didn't growl. But they were coming. And they saw me. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. My whole body tensed, heart thundering in my ears. The cub whimpered again and stirred slightly in my arms. Was this its family? I took a step back, water splashing around my thighs. One of the bears stopped, head cocked. The biggest of them moved slightly to the side, like it was trying to get a better look. This was it. No tree nearby to climb. No weapon. No chance. I was standing in a muddy river, holding what might be their cub, and they were closing in. I didn't even know if letting go would help. Running? Pointless. Every survival instinct screamed to move, but something else told me to wait. So I did. I knelt down again, slowly, and laid the cub in the shallows, its side barely rising and falling. Then I backed away, step by step, hands raised, water dragging at my legs. The bears paused, and then, like a ripple through their line, the tension shifted. One bear let out a low, huffing sound. The closest one inched forward. It looked not at me, but directly at the cub. I stepped farther back, still watching. The big one finally moved to the cub's side, sniffed it, then licked its face. Another came closer. I stood there, soaked, shivering, staring. They weren't attacking. They were checking on it. I couldn't make sense of any of it, but I didn't need to. I turned, heart pounding, and walked backward toward the shore. Behind me, the cub whimpered one more time. And behind it, quiet. No wars. No charge. Just the gentle splashes of water and pause. I didn't stop shaking until I was back on the bank. I collapsed onto the muddy earth and looked back. They were still there, surrounding the cub. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew this wasn't over. I didn't know how long I stood there, soaked to the bone, my boots heavy with river mud. My hands were still raised, and my arms ached, but I didn't dare lower them. The big bear, the one I assumed was the mother, kept her eyes locked on me. She stood maybe 15 feet away now, her body half turned toward the cub, half angled at me. There was no mistaking the tension in her frame. She was breathing hard. Every few seconds, she made a low, pulsing noise in her chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, just sound. Warning or question, I couldn't tell. The cub whimpered again, weaker this time. It moved one paw slowly, like it was trying to lift itself, but didn't make it far. I looked down at it, still lying in the water. I'd only backed up a few steps from where I'd set it down, and the shallows weren't doing it any favors. The current licked at its fur. I felt that tug again. Go back, lift it higher, at least get it out of the water, but I didn't move. I knew better. One wrong step, and this ended with my throat in her teeth. Another bear shifted behind her. This one was smaller, maybe a subadult. It edged closer to the cub, sniffing the air. Still no signs of a charge, but I could see the twitching in its shoulders. And then the mother bear stepped forward. One step. Two. The water barely reached her ankles, but her movements were slow, measured. Her eyes flicked to the cub, then back to me. I lowered my hand slightly. Not down, just a few inches. A signal. I'm not a threat. She paused again. Her nostrils flared. Then she let out a sharp exhale, like a huff, and stepped to the cub. She leaned down, gently, nudged it with her nose. The cub let out a faint sound and tried to lift its head. The bear backed off half a step, turned her head toward the forest, and made a deep, throaty grunt. 2 more bears emerged from the trees. I froze. They weren't charging. They weren't circling. They were just present, watching. It felt like I'd stumbled into something ancient and private. Then the mother leaned down again. This time, she gripped the cub's scruff gently between her jaws and lifted. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my chest started burning. I slowly backed farther away until I was ankle-deep on the muddy shore. The cub hung limp in her jaws, but I could see it breathing. She turned without a glance at me, water rippling around her massive legs. One by one, the others followed her back into the tree line. The last one, a younger bear with a notched ear, paused, looked straight at me, its head tilted, eyes steady. Then it turned and disappeared into the brush. I didn't move for a long time, not because I was frozen in fear, but because I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Maybe, but mostly confusion. What just happened wasn't supposed to be possible. I'd always heard never to get between a wild animal and its young, that once a human touched a cub, the mother might abandon it, that they attacked without warning. None of that had happened. She had watched me, measured me, and made her decision, and I was still standing. Eventually, I turned back to where my backpack lay near a tree. I had dropped it when I jumped into the river. My jacket was soaked. My fingers were raw from the cold. I pulled out my phone, no signal. I wasn't even surprised, but I still took a photo of the muddy riverbank. Just the water, the trees, the empty space where something almost unimaginable had happened. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Hell, I wasn't sure I believed me. I stayed on that riverbank until the sun dipped below the tree line. My clothes never dried. My boots squelched when I moved. The cold had worked its way into my bones, and no matter how many times I rubbed my hands together, the numbness wouldn't leave. I walked back to the dirt path where I'd parked my truck earlier that morning. It had started drizzling, soft, steady. By the time I got to the vehicle, the trail was already turning slick. I tossed my wet pack in the bed and climbed into the cab, teeth chattering. I turned the key. The engine growled but didn't catch. Tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. Maybe I'd left the headlights on after unloading my gear. Maybe it was just bad luck. But right then, sitting alone in the middle of nowhere, miles from cell service, it felt like a cruel joke. I laughed. One of those tired, bitter laughs that sound more like a cough. There wasn't much choice. I folded down the passenger seat, threw the emergency blanket over myself, and curled up in the damp clothes I couldn't change out of. The cold pressed in through the glass. My fingers ached. But more than that, it was the silence that got to me. No traffic, no voices, just wind and the occasional rustle from the woods. Somewhere out there, maybe only a few hundred yards from me, that bear family was bedding down too. I thought about calling for help, but no signal, no flares. My phone was just a black screen with a clock on it now. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my brain wouldn't let me. I kept replaying it. The river, the cub, her eyes, the pause before she took him. That moment where everything hung on a thread I couldn't see. And something else. The way the last bear, young, smaller, that notched ear, looked at me, like it had been trying to remember my face. I drifted off at some point, fitfully. When I woke, it was light again. Gray morning. Damp air. My fingers were stiff, and my mouth felt like sandpaper. But the rain had stopped. I stepped outside, boots sucking at the mud, and stretched. My neck cracked. I still had to get out of here. But first, I grabbed a protein bar from the glove box and started walking back to the river. It wasn't smart, not with no working vehicle and nobody knowing where I was. But I had to see it again, just to know it had really happened, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing in some hypothermic dream. The walk felt longer the second time. My legs were stiff. I kept stopping, listening. The forest felt empty, not in a peaceful way, but like it was holding its breath. When I reached the river, it looked just like before. Slow-moving, shallow, the same fallen log still wedged between the rocks upstream. I walked down the bank to the spot where I'd left the cub. No sign of blood, no drag marks, just paw prints. Dozens of them. Some small, some massive, all clustered in one area, then trailing off into the woods. I crouched next to one set, tiny, barely bigger than my palm. The cubs, they led away from the water into the undergrowth. I stood there for a while, staring. I wasn't sure what I had expected. Maybe some confirmation, a sign, something that would explain why they hadn't killed me, why she'd taken the cub and walked away. But the forest gave nothing. Still, I felt something settle in me. Not closure, not peace, just the understanding that it had really happened. I turned back toward the truck, legs heavier than before. Still alone, still soaked, still stranded, but no longer uncertain. Back home, the world didn't pause just because I had seen something I couldn't explain. Monday came, and with it, fluorescent lights, stiff coffee, and the hum of printers. At the office, people asked how my weekend went. I said it was cold and quiet, that I hiked a bit, that the truck died and I had to wait until morning to get it jumped. All true, just not the full truth. I didn't expect anyone to believe me anyway, so I kept the rest to myself. Until lunch, when I let something slip. I saw a bear, I said, more to myself than anyone. Jake, 2 desks down, perked up. Was it dancing or quoting Shakespeare? I gave him a tired look. No, seriously, he grinned. You didn't get it on video? Because if you tell me you made eye contact with a bear and it didn't maul you, I might have to call someone. Everyone laughed. Not maliciously, but the kind of laugh people give when something's just far enough outside their own world to be impossible. So I laughed too, pretended it was a joke. But that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook and wrote down everything. Not to publish, not to share, just to remember it as it was. The cold, the weight of the cub, the look in that young bear's eyes, the silence. The next few days blurred. I went through the motions, but something kept tugging at me. A feeling like I'd left something unfinished out there. Not like a movie ending, more like a door left ajar. A week later, I checked the forecast. Clear skies, mid-50s. I packed up a day bag, left a note on my counter just in case, and drove back toward the park. The trail was firmer this time. The mud had dried out in places, and my boots didn't stick with every step. Still, I took it slow. I didn't want to rush this. Whatever I was walking toward, it wasn't about chasing a story. It was about facing something that hadn't let go of me. The river was just as I remembered. Calm, muted, the same broken log, same bend in the bank. I stood there for a while, hands in my pockets, waiting, listening. But nothing came. No sounds, no shapes in the woods, no tracks. Except, just a few steps up the bank, I noticed a cluster of broken branches. Not just snapped by wind. They were bent in odd ways, stripped of bark in spots. Not a huge disturbance, but intentional, like something had moved through here with care. I crouched and ran my fingers along the break. Rough, not clean like from a blade. There were hairs caught on the bark. Coarse, light brown, too thick for deer, too long for fox. Not human. I brushed them into a small zip bag from my pack and stood up, glancing into the tree-line. My heart was beating faster, but not from fear. Recognition. Something had been here. Recently. Not days ago, maybe hours. I didn't shout. Didn't call out. That wasn't the kind of moment this was. I just stood there, feeling the stillness. Feeling the way the air shifted around me. The way the forest seemed to acknowledge me in its own quiet way. And then I turned, slowly, and started walking back. Not because I was done, but because I didn't need proof. I already had it. A month passed. Spring had turned lush. The trees were full now, the canopy filtering sunlight into slow-moving beams that danced across the forest floor. Birds were louder, the air warmer, and the trails more crowded on weekends. But I didn't go back right away. Something in me said not to rush it. Then one Friday, without really deciding to, I packed a small bag and drove out again. This time, I didn't bring a camera or a notebook. I didn't even check the weather. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I wasn't planning on staying long. I just needed to walk that trail one more time. Not looking for a moment. Just closure. The dirt road into the park was drier, dustier. I parked in the same place as before. Took the same steps. The trailhead greeted me like a quiet friend. As I walked, everything felt both familiar and different. The river sounded louder in the warmth. The grass had grown high along the banks. The broken log was still there, half submerged. Time hadn't stopped here. It never does. I didn't plan on stopping. I thought I'd walk past the river, maybe loop the longer trail, and head back. But habit pulled me closer. I found myself standing at the same spot where I'd pulled the cub from the water. Where I'd knelt, soaked, breathless, and waited to die. Where a mother bear had looked at me and decided not to kill me. I stood there longer than I meant to. Then something shifted. I heard movement. Not far. Upstream. Not a person, too quiet. But not wind either. I turned. He stood there. Mid-sized. Still young, but bigger now. Probably a yearling by now, or nearly. His coat was a little darker than I remembered, but the way he stood, head tilted slightly, front paw just a little forward, was the same. We both froze. The river murmured between us. He didn't run, didn't growl. I didn't move. We just looked at each other. A few seconds passed. Maybe longer. Long enough that I felt something tighten in my chest. Recognition. I don't know what he saw in me. Maybe nothing. Maybe just another human standing still. But something in the way he watched made my stomach drop. Like he remembered. Or wanted to. And then, just as calmly as he'd appeared, he turned and padded into the trees. No drama. No charge. No sound beyond the rustling underfoot. I let out a slow breath. Didn't follow. Didn't speak. Just stood still until the woods closed behind him. Then I turned back toward the path and walked away. That was the last time I went to that river. I never told anyone about it. Except you. I still think about that day sometimes. The way his eyes found mine. The silence between us. And I wonder, do bears remember? Do they carry pieces of us the way we carry pieces of them? Was that moment instinct, coincidence, or something else?